All right, thank you, Justin, for those remarks, and thank you all for your questions. As Jeff mentioned at the top of this, my name is Gerron Jordan. I'm the morning news anchor at WISN Channel 12 here, and also the co-host of Upfront, which airs every Sunday. Shameless plug. Hope you can join us all the time. Thank you guys for having me here to kind of moderate this panel. Thank you again, Justin, for your remarks. And before we hop into the questions, which were really great, and I've even got my own after some of those last remarks, the questions from you guys about oil and gas and things like that. I just wanted to have our panelists introduce themselves really quickly, tell us who you are, what you do, and what brings you to this event here. We'll start with Chuck in the middle. We'll go from Chuck, Randy, and then Maria.
Thank you, Gerron. And I'd like to thank Wisconsin Energy Initiative, John, and American Sustainable Business Network and WisPolitics, Jeff, for inviting us to be here on the panel today. My name is Chuck McGinnis. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Johnson Controls Sustainable Infrastructure. And Johnson Controls has introduced a new class of smart buildings that are secure, healthy, and sustainable. As the world's only pure-play smart buildings company, we're leading building transformation by creating spaces to improve the well-being and achieve climate goals and allow our customers to save money. And we've had a long history here in Wisconsin. Professor Warren Johnson in 1885 was a professor at the Normal School in Whitewater, which today is the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. And he didn't like the temperature of his classroom because the furnace would come on, his classroom would overheat, he'd open the windows, it would get too cold, he'd close the windows, the cycle would continue. And he invented the thermostat, which at that time was a damper flapper, would close, and started a business that today it was Johnson Service Company, and today is Johnson Controls. And he partnered with the financier William Plankinton, there's a street named after him, obviously. And, the rest is history. The first installations of these controls were the Milwaukee Public Library and City Hall. And I have to recognize our partner, City of Milwaukee, here today. Eric and I share this 140-year responsibility of a partnership. Eric's the Director of Sustainable Environment, Director of Environmental Sustainability with the Environmental Collaboration Office of the City of Milwaukee. We've done a number of projects, energy efficiency projects. We've used CARES Act money to do pandemic technologies to reduce to reduce virus transfer. And so we're really excited to be here today because there are barriers in the marketplace today for our clients to implement the types of technologies that we're talking about. And it really stems around inflation and interest rates. And we think that the IRA is the key to unlocking these projects and getting around those two primary barriers. Thank you.
Randy.
Yeah, great. So first, thanks to Chuck for thanking our hosts. So that applies to Maria and I as well. So
Thank you.
We don't thank Chuck. We don't have to do that. I'm Randy Satterfield. So I have my own consulting practice in the clean energy and decarbonization space, doing some work for renewable energy developers, but then also some national policy work around permitting that I'll reference. But prior to that, I'd spent nearly 20 years at American Transmission Company, so that's the utility building transmission lines in Wisconsin and portions of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And maybe just a couple of quick comments on Justin's comments. He's absolutely right that, IRA is incentive laden, and there's lots of really good stuff in there to help electrify the economy. I think it's worth noting, right, for this audience, for those of us in Wisconsin, that Wisconsin's utilities have kind of been ahead of the game to a degree with their advancement of renewable energy projects. The investor-owned utilities in this state, prior to IRA, right, had plans to invest upwards to, well, actually north of $7 billion in clean energy projects, and many of those projects are in active development. What IRA will do is will help kind of further speed that process, but also through those tax credits help drive costs down for end users of electricity. And then just on the permitting side, that absolutely is a challenge, especially with respect to transmission. But I think probably also going to continue or actually grow as a challenge, even with permitting and siting renewable facilities, be they wind farms or solar facilities. We have kind of anecdotally seen a little bit of fossil fuel resources come into local communities in opposition to some renewable projects, and I suspect that we likely will see more of that in the coming years. And it's going to be really incumbent on Maria and her colleagues at the state level to make sure, right, we keep our eye on the ball and are making decisions around siting approvals that are based on facts and not emotion. That's not to say that we shouldn't take seriously the concerns of local landowners. We absolutely should, and we should mitigate those concerns where necessary, where we can. But at the same time, we got a lot of important work to do with respect to this kind of clean energy transition.
Good afternoon, everyone. Maria Redmond here. In addition to thanking the sponsors, I want to thank all of you for taking your time to be here and to be a part of the discussion. It's from your various roles, it's going to take a village for all of us to be able to really capture this opportunity and optimize all of the funding that's coming in, and we're all going to need to work together. So I have been working for the state of Wisconsin for 22 years, and I entered into the state right after college and was working on a fleet report, and have slowly but surely worked my way into sitting in front of you and being able to talk to you about all of these great opportunities that are in front of us today. I was around during ARA, so I have that, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which was my first taste of federal support for a lot of this work that we're doing locally. But this is really an exciting time to be in this work. We have a governor that's very supportive of climate action and equity, and centering our work on environmental justice and really thinking about our communities here in the state and the things that we can do to transition to a clean energy economy and in an equitable way. And so I think today just one, sharing the excitement of the moment, but also sharing in the we don't have all the answers quite yet, and that we're really trying. We know our role as a state, and we know we have a plan in place. Last year, well, I would say that the first plan that came out was the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change final report, and that set a precedent and set recommendations for the state to move forward with addressing climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. And then we moved into the development of a clean energy plan for the state, which actually, it's almost been a year since we released that plan. So really thinking about how do these funding opportunities, not the infrastructure law and IRA, feed into these strategies, and how do we all work collectively to make sure that we're implementing and seeing substantial change and addressing emissions and addressing the health of our communities throughout this process.
Awesome. I'm going to go off script just a little bit for my first question. I do have a couple of questions to ask specifically about how all of this is impacting us here in Wisconsin, but I do want to start kind of more broadly based off of kind of, Justin, how you wrapped up. I'm always curious to know how and why things turn to be so political, things that maybe don't seem like they are political issues, things that are based on fact and data-driven reporting, how we've gotten to this place where things seem to be so political. I spent nearly a decade in Louisiana along the Gulf Coast working and reporting on issues of climate, environmental racism, environmental justice. And it's interesting when you brought up Houston and the oil and gas industry, which is the state's biggest economic driver. The conversations that you have, I think, in not just Houston or Texas or Louisiana, there does seem to be the resistance to speed up any type of transition to clean energy. There's fear of jobs being taken away. There's fear of the economic opportunities for these different places. So the question is, why is this such a political issue? And is it the approach to achieving these goals does everyone have the same end goal in mind, and is it just the approach, or what is it? Anyone can take.
Yeah, I
anyone
can jump in.
start
I
with
feel
that.
like it's a natural fit for me to start. So I think it is it's a value system. I think that the state, for example, our state is very doesn't want to be told what to do. That we appreciate free market opportunities, and that like any drive to change by policy there's a lot of pushback. And so, we've seen a lot of opportunity and change in the market as it relates to like solar, like the cost of solar, for example, has gone down. And so you see that uptick, but then the policy that's coming from the federal level could like really push us to implement more solar. If we could get the state on board to also have some policy in place to help deploy more solar and look at the barriers that we have in our laws to make sure that we're opening up these opportunities. I think there's just a lot of like interplay with a lot of different values, and I think when we some people just don't want to talk about climate, even though you see the impact of climate change and the impact it has on how much money we're spending to recover from climate disasters, how much we're paying for recovery of people's health related to asthma and cancers and health issues. We're not looking at those numbers, but if you talk to folks, and I think a lot of times when we talk about climate, they're just thinking of polar bears or whatever it may be. We have to bring that discussion locally to our communities to talk about the impact that it has on the community and what it means to that community. And that's something that we've really been trying. And then also speaking to our legislators about the impact that it's having on their constituents, and not talking about climate in particular, but talking about the economy and how much we spend on our energy here in the state. And I'm sorry for everyone who hears me say this thousands of times, but we spend over $21 billion on our energy needs in the state, and over $15 billion of that leaves the state. There's no, that's an economic discussion that, every person who's in a political decision-making position needs to think about, and what can we do to keep those dollars here? So it's talking about the value system and talking about the things that are important and speaking the language of folks of what they're interested in talking about. Let's not talk about climate, but let's talk about your communities, and let's talk about the economy and jobs.
Anyone else want to take
Yeah,
that?
maybe just picking up on that theme a little, back to one of my earlier comments, right? So Wisconsin utilities, right, as I had mentioned, have been ahead of the game, and that's in part because of the market, right? The market was driving renewable energy to be lower cost than gas and coal and nuclear energy. So, the comment to Justin about, potential legislation overturning, IRA or other provisions, and I think you probably gave kind of a shrug to that, and I think that's in part because whether you're D or R, right, when the market's driving lower cost resources, especially with respect to electricity, well, that's where the market is, and so that's where the utilities are going, and I think that's an important point. And then just the second point I would note is, I saw some Pew research, I think it was from last year, on climate. And if I remember correctly from that research, I think a majority of the publics across the country generally now recognize that climate change is an issue, and that in part, right, man-made issue that can be addressed. So I think there's a wide understanding. The issue then becomes, well, how do you address it? And I think so much of that, to Maria's point, goes to value systems and communication and education, but also equity, right? And dealing with people in responsible and equitable ways.
From my perspective, I'm speaking on behalf of building owners. Think about institutions. Think about the state of Wisconsin's buildings that they operate, whether it's a corrections environment or whether it's a higher ed environment. And there seems to be unilateral bipartisan support for energy efficiency measures and renewable energy measures that are cost effective, okay? But that formula is a really key formula. So as you think about Canada, where they have a carbon tax, the cost of carbon can get included in that cost effectiveness test. Whereas here, we don't have that well-defined. In fact, one of the tools that Johnson Controls is developing is this thing called marginal abated cost of carbon, MAC curves, and help people understand, what the different priorities are around carbon abatement and what actually is the individual organization's cost of carbon. And I think once we get some more work done in that area, we will continue to come closer together for bipartisan support.
Did you want to add something to that, Justin?
No pressure.
No. Okay.
I'll come in on another one.
All right, I wanted to kind of cite the WPR, Wisconsin Public Radio report that you mentioned also, that revealed that the Inflation Reduction Act could bring more than 24,000 jobs to Wisconsin over the next 10 years. So I'm curious to our panelists, looking at the IRA, how will it change the energy landscape in your organizations, for your clients? How do you plan on, taking this IRA and the benefits from it, and even some of the challenges in implementing them in your own organizations?
I'd like to go first on that, and to answer your question, Justin, will the companies pick this up? The answer is absolutely. Johnson Controls is picking this up, and we are hiring up. And I want to also have a shout out to all the Johnson Controls folks in the raise your hands, please. It's so good to see you. Thanks y'all for coming out. Yeah, thank you.
All right, give it up for Johnson Controls.
We're hiring up. I mean, we are hiring people specifically to grow this market and to help empower our customers to take advantage of this great opportunity for them to have almost a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a giant stride forward in their strategic plan around sustainability. Second, we're developing new products and services, and there's one particular offering that's just really amazing. It's called Net Zero as a Service. And we launched that a couple months ago. It's a very flexible offering, can be applied to any type of a facility, and what it does, it allows, because a lot of us are making these climate goals. Johnson Controls has a climate goal to be net zero by 24 as an organization, and we have, net zero by 2040, and we have a lot of industrial sites all over the world. And so this is, not only are we trying to get our clients to do this, we're figuring this out at the same time. And so that's where we're headed with approaching the market for IRA, and we think that it's just going to be a great place.
Yeah, so again, picking up on the theme of the work that the utilities are doing, I think each of the utilities in the state of Wisconsin have committed to a net zero by 2050, if I remember correctly. So, right, there's going to be a lot of renewable energy development in this state. IRA and the tax credits are certainly going to help with that. But on kind of the workforce side, right, for example, a 300 megawatt solar facility requires upwards to 500 to 600 kind of on-site construction folk during the time of the construction of that facility. So if you multiply that by the amount of renewable energy facilities we're going to need in this state, you're going to have a pretty good number of jobs over a period of time just installing those facilities. And that doesn't even take into account the economic benefits that flow from that, right? Hotel rooms, where you need them, and stores and restaurants taking advantage of that workforce being usually in rural, smaller communities that could use some of that economic help and development. And then maybe just a note on the supply chain side, there was a discussion around that earlier. And I do want to note that last week, one of the nation's leading renewable energy developers announced a $600 million investment in a solar panel manufacturing facility in the state of Ohio that will result in 850 full-time jobs, and that facility will generate, I think it's 5,000 megawatts of panels on an annual basis. So that's a significant and important development with respect to the supply chain. And I raise that because, tell me a state that's better positioned to go and try to, capture some manufacturing in the clean energy space in the state of Wisconsin, right? We have really solid transportation sectors, rail, highway and shipping. We've got a manufacturing ethic. I think there's great opportunity for the state to be pursuing partnerships with some of those entities that want to set up some of these manufacturing facilities.
So I think that from the state's perspective, I see it from kind of two angles. One is, as state agencies and a state, doing business here in Wisconsin, we need to lead by example. And so looking at our own practices, our own services, everything that we're doing, how can we take advantage of the IRA funding and make sure that, we are walking the walk and talking the talk. But the other part of it is that our, clients are the people we work with is every resident, every local government, every non-governmental org, everybody here in the state of Wisconsin, anybody who uses energy, who is living here is someone that we would want to be working with. And the thing to think about with IRA is that at least 2/3 of the funding related to IRA is related to tax credits. And so a lot of the funding is going to be coming to the state or going to be, the other third is either a direct formula allocation to the state or a competitive process where the state and partners could apply, or our partner or anybody could apply. So the thing about it is that we want to make sure that, how many in here would agree that we should bring as much money of the IRA money into Wisconsin as possible? Right. So it's our job to help coordinate that and to work with you on making that happen. That is going to require a lot of education and outreach. One of the challenges with tax credits is that you have to pay for the cost of the equipment up front. And then the next year you're able to have it on your taxable, on your taxes. I'm not a tax expert, so I'm probably saying the wrong words. But essentially, so what can we do to help with that upfront financing? Or how can we get creative so that more of the technology can get into our communities? So we have to be thinking about our programs like property assessed clean energy. I'm probably getting that wrong. PACE, I got it right? Okay. PACE, maybe setting up a green bank, working with banks on green loans, unique financing opportunities to make sure that we can get that technology deployed as quickly as possible.
I was going to ask, how do you do that? And or, from the state's position, are you seeing the willingness to look for that financing to be able to do that up front?
Yeah, I think there is an appetite to do that. The other question I'll ask everybody is how many people are confused on how to even start approaching IRA and what to do next, right? Yeah, so there's a few hands. Feel free to just throw it up there because I feel the same way. People are looking to the state for guidance on all of this, and so internally, there's a lot of things that we're trying to do. Is one, organize our agencies a bit more so that we're all working collectively. That's my role. That's what the office's role is. And then also getting that information out as efficiently as possible and helping people with their applications. One of the major things is capacity and the ability to apply for this funding and to know, what do I do? And what am I, even as a resident, what am I eligible for? What can I apply for? So that's, trying to get that information out as quickly as possible so that we can get those dollars here in the state.
And not to keep coming back to you just back to back like this,
Oh,
but just, for people who don't know that first step to, what's out there with this IRA funding, first steps on trying to tap into it, is it all just the education on knowing where to go, or what do people need to know?
OSCE@wisconsin.gov. We have a whole network of people that we're working with to organize around this. And so there are a lot of local governments, like contacting your local governments. There are a lot of non-governmental organizations. I would give a shout out to Renew and their team. I know you have been working on getting the word out. There are a lot of folks working in this space, and we're trying to organize around it as much as possible. But I throw my name out there, and I throw my office out there, and we might be a good starting point to get you connected with the right folks locally, as well as trying to get you connected with the right resources. But I'm an office of 1.5 people, and so that's another thing, is making sure that we lean in on everybody that wants to help.
I want to widen this out just a little bit, not just talking about the IRA, but looking at the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill as well, which are large government programs. Same situation, Justin. Big government programs, right? Big government, keyword there. What are the opportunities and challenges presented by all of the federal action that's really included under all of these, large federal programs in your own respective organizations dealing with clients? What do you see as the opportunities and challenges of all of this influence?
I guess I'll kick it off. I think we've touched on, right, certainly some of the opportunities. I'm going to kind of go to the challenges and maybe pick up where Justin left off from his remarks around permitting, right? So back to the IRA for a minute, as Maria just said, right, a bunch of tax credits, a lot of incentives, a lot of carrots that really only pay off if the work gets done. And so the work has to get done, and back to Justin's third challenge, permitting is a key issue. I mentioned it before. Justin's spot on around transmission and permitting. There wasn't a lot in IRA. There was some in the infrastructure bill with respect to transmission, but transmission remains a great challenge, right? Permitting linear infrastructure, tens or potentially hundreds of miles, often, through people's backyards or, the back 40, remains a difficult task, and one that probably is worthy of, further consideration about how to kind of improve on that. And I'll give you maybe just one, for example, here in the state of Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin, when a transmission line is proposed, two routes have to be given to the regulator to consider which is the best route, right? And the regulator ultimately chooses among those two routes. If we're serious about speeding the process of bringing this infrastructure online, and again, you have to be able to move the electrons that a renewable facility generates, so we need more transmission. If we want to speed the development of transmission, what if the state of Wisconsin decided that, if you propose a route that's on existing rights-of-way, like an existing transmission line right-of-way, or a highway right-of-way, or even potentially a rail right-of-way, maybe you don't have to submit two routes. Maybe you can just submit that one route. And what does that do? Well, it means you're not bothering, you're bothering half as many people who may have a transmission line sited on their property. It also means you're probably going to speed the permitting process a bit. So just kind of subtle things like that in our own state could help speed the permitting. And this other initiative that I'm doing some work with called Next Gen Highways is kind of rooted in that idea of compelling states and state DOTs to open up their highway right-of-way for consideration of co-location of transmission infrastructure. To do, again, a couple of things: to speed the permitting process and to bother fewer people, right? And so Wisconsin is the one state in the country that's actively permitting, siting, and building transmission in the highways. Justin, you had mentioned Minnesota. We've been working closely with the DOT up in Minnesota on this concept, and the legislature in Minnesota and Governor Walz signed a bill just, last month I think it was, committing Minnesota to decarbonizing by 2040. And so we're talking about this concept of opening up the Minnesota highways and interstate system, at least for the consideration of co-location of transmission to help speed the process. And so just like some concrete, real things, I think, like that can be very helpful if we're to ensure that IRA is going to pay off in the way that we hope it does.
I would just say that this is a great opportunity, and I would phrase it in innovation. It really gives us like the CHIPS bill allows for funding. They just made a major announcement on funding for research and development for clean energy technology. That's a great opportunity to pilot technology and get it out into the world and get it to commercialization. Solutions to climate change through action, and the work that's happening, like the integration and embedding of environmental justice and Justice 40, ensuring that our communities are reaping the benefits of the deployment of this funding, and how we track that and measure that and show that that is actually happening, and then creating action around all of this. We have prioritized clean energy, our clean energy economy, the transition here in the state, and to include justice, equity, and collective action. And so I think, this just is like a blessing, right? Like we issued our clean energy plan, and a few months later we got, this big federal package, and now we get to implement a lot of that, a lot of what's in the clean energy plan because of this investment. So, and it is going to be really great if we do it right.
Just tying into that also, we're targeting disadvantaged communities for living spaces. So we don't have enough housing for affordable housing pretty much anywhere. And there's a real opportunity for public housing, affordable housing, workforce-related housing, where you have employees living in a common area where you have a subsidized rate for rent, for example, because there's certain organizations in many different geographies that can't support their workforce, and then having associated workforce development projects. But right behind that is the Renew Schools grant, the tax incentives for renewables, where you can get a direct payment for the public sector entity for the equivalent of the tax incentive. That's a huge change in the tax law. And we've got just a whole host of school districts, cities, counties, higher ed institutions that want to take advantage of that. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program is being re-upped for $500 million. That's always it's what's the least expensive way to reduce emissions, energy efficiency, right? The SEP program is being re-upped, which is great. There's money in there for airports. General Mitchell won Airport of the Year in 2021 nationally, as I understand it, and there's certainly opportunities there. And as I mentioned, some of the technologies, fuel cells, solar, heat pumps, clean vehicles, vehicle charging, there's something in there for everybody.
Can I just add on to that? I'm so excited about the direct pay. This is like, normally when tax credits come out, there's like the investment tax credit that you could take advantage of, but you had to be like a resident or business, a taxable entity. And now local governments, nonprofits can take advantage of the direct pay, which is super exciting. That's not something that was historically done, and it really opens up the opportunity. The other thing I want to mention is that we're all thinking in the now, and like we're all super excited, but this is actually a 10-year program. So you don't have to have everything situated right at this moment. Like you can take your time to figure out, work with people to figure out the best plan of action. I know we had the discussion about what if things flip, but you know what? We are here, and now we know it's available now. We know it's going to be available for the next few years. Don't feel so much pressure that you have to get things done right now. Work through the process and make sure that you have a great project and take advantage of as much of IRA as you possibly can.
Can I just add one very quick thing, and just because we discussion of the justice theme, which was really just a little bit, I touched on it a little bit in my remarks, but I do think particularly when you look at the bipartisan infrastructure law and how some of that money is being used, dealing with things like lead pipes, dealing with and then you look at Justice 40 and sort of the commitment to use everything for justice purposes. I think when you add all of these things up, you have an opportunity to really deal with some of the systemic injustices in a concrete way that there hasn't been and I think probably the lifespan, of most people here, like just the scale of this opportunity, it's a really pivotal moment. And so we have to see how that money gets spent, to what degree, when you give money to certain states, how do they use it, do they take it, et cetera. But I think there's a really big opportunity when it comes to this justice question in IRA, but also in the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Which has also become pretty politicized, environmental justice, and if that is actually a thing, which is pretty interesting to follow. We've heard a lot from Maria about what the state is doing right now and talking about the transition to this clean energy shift. What can local governments be doing to assist in this entire process as well?
Oh, you want me to start?
Sure.
I feel like I've been talking a lot, sorry.
Anyone can take it, we'll learn from all of you.
Yeah, local governments are key. I mean, the local government, if you haven't looked at Governor Evers' executive budget, there is some funding in there for proposed for technical assistance specific to local governments, because we recognize the role that local governments have played for 8 years. We didn't talk about climate change here in the state of Wisconsin prior to this administration coming on board. The local governments were the ones that were doing the work and really taking charge of climate initiatives and a clean energy transition, and so we want to continue to build on that. There's a huge role, but we do recognize the lack of capacity, especially in our rural areas. I know was just a recent announcement about rural support, the IRA funding. I believe it's IRA funding. I'm getting my infrastructure law and IRA funding mixed up, but I do think there's some funding for rural energy transition, and we've been looking at that and how can we bring our rural communities together to apply for some of this funding. Really local, in my mind, local government's where it's at. We need to partner with our local governments, and they're gonna lead by example, not only lead by example, but work for their communities to get these goals accomplished.
Just picking up on the theme of the state partnering with local government, I think that's absolutely the right way to go, and I would hope that part of that conversation, right, is also engaging local government kind of in the context of their role, not just with respect to their local community, but also more broadly, right, to the state as a whole, and even more broadly than that, to society as a whole. And where am I coming from with this? Back to the permitting issue, right? As you know, we're going to have significant amounts of utility scale renewable facilities proposed and hopefully sited in this state, and those facilities, be they wind or solar, are going to be in rural communities, local small towns. And I think anything that the state can do, but frankly that all of us can do, right, to help local officials better understand the need for those facilities, the value that they deliver, both economic as well as with respect to carbon reductions and other pollutant reductions. The more that we can all do to help them understand that, and that those projects, yeah, they benefit the local community economically and from an emission standpoint, but they're also beneficial to the state as a whole. Mm-hmm. And local governments can have a role to play, right, with respect to ensuring that those projects stay on the right track to getting permitted.
Well, Maria took one of my bullet points, which was lead by example. It's always, not only just the local government leading by example, but promoting, good examples of what other people are doing in the community. As I look at public sector executives and the management teams that manage these complicated organizations, there's never enough people. 1.5 people in your office. I mean, think about that. And that's the norm. I was in D.C. for 3 days last week. There's not enough people within our government system to get this out. And so one of the things I'd like people to think about, and I got this idea actually from one of the public sector executives, and he said, I'm going to do as few contracts as I can, as big as I can, because that way I can get the money moving. And now don't think that that's just going to go to one company. You know, you can organize a market with the right players so that you can get more companies involved through that process, right? And so, and that's really what's driving inflation is a lack of available. We don't have an elastic manpower anymore. We don't have the ability to scale up from a people perspective. And so that's driving wages up, which is really driving inflation today and hurting productivity on products, right? Well, the same thing's happening within government. So, you know, that idea about creatively getting these projects out, number one, and number two, leveraging. So for every dollar that somebody receives in a government subsidy, having them be able to multiply that times 5 and leverage it up so that it's a comprehensive project. Why is that important? Because of lead pipes. They don't have a payback. Because of deferred maintenance. You know, think about a solar array. It sounds great. Let's get a solar array. Well, the roof can't handle the weight, or the roof needs a new roof, right? And so, and the same is true with energy efficiency and all the things that are behind these walls that you don't see that probably need to be replaced. So by leveraging up, you accelerate and you're able to take advantage of the IRA program at a speed and at a scale that maybe wasn't otherwise to be achieved.
All right, I've got like 1.5 more questions, and then we can open it up to anyone out there who's got a question for our panel. You know, how long is this going to take, this clean energy transition? It's a big question. I don't know if you have an answer to that, but given, you know, even the president's administration's approval of Arctic drilling, fossil fuels, nuclear play, all of that, if we're talking about this clean energy shift, this transition to clean energy, how long are we talking?
We have a goal in Wisconsin for 100% carbon-free electricity consumed in the state by 2050. Now that's one specific sector. We know the intersecting of sectors as we electrify transportation, as we build out transmission, and are able to get more renewables online. You know, we want to see that transition happen by 2050. But you know, we'd like to see it happen sooner. We can, but the other part of this is we're still very reliant on fossil fuels. I mean, how did you get here today? Did you drive an electric car? I drove a natural gas car because that's what I have, and it's, you know, reduced emissions, and I've had it since 2012. Are you doing as the things that you need to do to reduce your fossil fuel consumption and creating less of demand for that? Right now, where, you know, it's about behavior change, it's about the policy that's needed. You know, there's a lot of components in this, and so it's going to take time. It's not a snap of the finger. We also have to think about affordability. We can't just shut down a coal plant. We can't just shut down our nuclear, you know, plant that we have, because that provides 16% of our energy here in Wisconsin. And nuclear in Wisconsin is considered a clean energy, and that's another, you know, some people disagree with that. And so right now we're taking an all of the above approach, and it will take time. I don't, you know, we have a goal, and I lean in on that goal. Would I like to see it happen sooner? Yes, I would like to be retired, sitting with my margarita and say, we did it. Keep going.
Yeah, that sounds good. And it just popped in my head, maybe this is the half of the 1.5 questions I had, but is there a finish line then to this? You know, what is the marker, what is the indication that we have achieved that, you know, that goal, that 100%?
I don't think there's ever a finish line. I think this is an ongoing, multi-generational approach that, you know, we have to teach, you know, it's like you know, principles and practice that have to continue into the future, I think. That's my personal thought on it.
I'll kind of lump this in with the last question that I did have, which is how do you get, because obviously this is a room full of people who are versed in this, who have an interest in it, a passion in it. How do you get the everyday person who is not here, who's not a part of this panel, who's not really researching any of this, how do you get them to not only care, but to understand these complex issues and then to be engaged and activated?
The first thing is to turn off their lights. People don't care about energy until they don't have access to it. I mean that, like, we take advantage of our comfort. We take, and that, again, this is my personal opinion, and what I see, but I think, we need to be out there educating people about their energy burden. Like, how much are you paying for the income that you're bringing in for your energy? What can you do? What are things that you can do now? Not waiting for the incentives to come, but like, what can you do now? You can be more energy efficient. You can put in insulation. You can save water and conserve, which has a domino effect on the whole system. So there are things that we need to be doing now to let people know, like the steps that we can take. And so we work across lots of organizations that are sitting in this room, our local governments, the state, to ensure that we're, don't ever underestimate the power of education and outreach.
Yeah, I would concur with that, and I would also suggest that Justin and his colleagues in the news media, right? They do a lot. They try hard. There's more that certainly can be done, but there's more that we all can do. And I think even right in schools and businesses, right, we can make discussions around this new clean energy economy front and center, right? Many businesses, no doubt, are leading already, but communicating with their employees about what they can be doing at home. Not mandating things, of course, but simply communicating about what they can be doing at home to help with the transition can be helpful. And also, whatever we can do with school districts or the teachers unions or whoever it might be around curriculum development and starting as early as we can in the school systems around educating how the energy system works, the transportation system. I mean, I think all of that is important because it's going to take years. Maria said Wisconsin's goal is 2050. We referenced Minnesota earlier at 2040, which may be one of the more aggressives, maybe outside of California. I think New York's got aggressive goals, but it's going to take a significant amount of education and information.
Not everybody understands conceptual ideas and can interpret science research. I think simple examples with people is the best approach for trying to educate folks on the importance of what we're doing, and coming up with 2 or 3 simple examples that are pretty straightforward is a really good way to start with folks.
I would just underscore what I think sort of everyone has said, and I think the way I think about this and reporting and writing is just meet people where they are. If I'm on the road talking to people about what are their issues in their community, what are the connections to climate change, how can I meet them where they are? And I think that, if you're in a business, you can think about how do you translate this into language that makes sense for your colleagues or your employees, so that they understand this through the language that is what they're dealing with every day. And so I think you can apply that anywhere, but I think a nice way to sum it up is just meet people where they are.
Thank you to our panel. I'll open up the floor for questions. All right, love to see hands. We'll start here.
Thanks. Just some simple examples. So my read on the IRA is it's less formula driven, and it's more the early bird gets the worm. And I'm not convinced that all that money is going to be there 10 years from now. And here we are, we're sitting in Milwaukee. Milwaukee was the tool and die capital of the world for 100 years. I don't know how many parts there are in the wind turbine, 4,000 or 5,000, but they're not being made here, to Justin's point about the supply chain challenges, and to Randy's point about what just happened in Ohio with 5,000 megawatt solar plant and all those jobs. We've got Johnson Controls doing great work. We've got a wind turbine capability in the northeast part of the state, and a maritime capability with fiberglass. You can retool fiberglass. We've got deep water ports. Wisconsin is well positioned on this issue as any, but obviously our policies have kind of gotten in the way. So we've got Ingeteam in the Menominee Valley making solar panels and making EV chargers. We've got $1 billion in Foxconn public investments, which isn't really producing anything, which could be an opportunity. So anyway, so we've got the goods, the money's there. We really haven't talked about workforce. We talked about it. in terms of government. Could you comment on that, the workforce challenge for all these jobs that we absolutely need to drive these emissions down?
We have a very strong strategy around equity and social justice around our workforce development. So we're making investments into community college partnership programs. We're developing HVAC conservation labs on multiple sites. In some cases, retraining inmates on correction sites. We've had tremendous success at Virginia Department of Corrections, where we've graduated over the last 7 years, I think 60, and we have a recidivism rate of less than 2%, which that particular facility has a recidivism rate of 48%. And so, giving folks the right certification so that they can make the right living wage, is really important. And then we have academies that we set up at various schools in order to try to create that workforce of the future, right? To be able to deliver on these. That's been our approach within JCI.
So Governor Evers has, as part of the Clean Energy Plan, has focused on a goal of 40,000 clean energy jobs by 2030. And a couple of ways to support that is one, a workforce inventory that I am starting to kick off now of what is a clean energy job and what are the pathways, who are the people working in this space, and what can we do to get people into those positions, but also recognizing that overall our manufacturing and industry and businesses here in Wisconsin are struggling just for workforce. And so how do we couple the expansion of clean energy workforce with addressing the current workforce issues and not taking people away from other opportunities as well, and finding the what does a person want to do, what do our youth want to do when they're leaving high school? Can we have early programs that talk to people about, or talk to our children about the trades and these types of jobs. Also, justice impacted individuals is a great opportunity. There are, what DWD said, I think over 6,000 individuals, low offense, I don't know if that's a minimal offense, minimal offenders, leaving incarceration in Wisconsin annually. And so this is like a great opportunity to direct people to these justice impacted individuals to these jobs, and work with developers and work with communities to ensure that these jobs are careers. They're not just jobs that people get, that they're long time careers. So we also, the governor, as part of the Clean Energy Plan, has proposed a workforce advisory council made up of labor, tech colleges, universities, non-governmental orgs to help organize around workforce for clean energy. And so we're hoping to stand that up after we get the workforce inventory done. And then also looking at the governor's budget proposal, the governor has proposed $10 million over the biennium for clean energy training. And so we need that policy to pass. So we want to make sure that the advocates are looking at that policy and talking to their legislators about why this is so important and why this funding is definitely needed, so that we can get the training and get people into these jobs.
Questions?
So I have a comment and a question. So my comment is, one of my favorite programs from the infrastructure law is the Reconnecting Communities program, because I think it's a wonderful exercise in humility. The federal government coming out and saying, we made a mistake, and we're going to put $1 billion to try to fix it, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because we talked about the importance of relaxing permitting, which I think it's essential. We need more transmission lines to get renewable energy to the places where we need it. So there is no question that we need that. My question is, knowing that we have a history of making mistakes because we don't talk to people that is usually affected by things we build. So what do we need to make sure that we get right as we relax the permitting process, and who has the responsibility to make sure that we don't have to create a reconnecting communities 2.0 100 years from now. That's going to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're spot on. And I think the responsibility lies with the developers, right? Whether it's a renewable energy facility or a transmission facility, whatever the infrastructure might be. To my mind, the responsibility is with the developer to make sure that they're engaging all communities at the local level, right? Including the disadvantaged and most impacted communities at the local level. And just to give you a for example on this Next Gen Highways initiative that I'm doing some work with, part of our vision is ultimately, it's going to take some years, but ultimately to get to a point where developers are coupling high voltage direct current transmission with communications infrastructure along highway corridors, right, to provide for the EV charging that's going to be necessary, but also to move the renewable electrons. And then in urban, right, providing broadband resources as well to rural communities, but also urban communities. What we see so often in urban communities is those communities that interstate highway corridors run through tend to be the most taken advantage of, right, and the ones who aren't connected from a broadband access. And so, again, our vision is if we've got this infrastructure, we put it underground, right, so it's not impacting them with, poles and wires, and then have converter stations so that you have access to reliable, clean electrons right there, and you partner with, some of the technology companies that are always looking for locations for new data centers, your Metas of the world and Microsofts and whatnot. You can use that infrastructure to drive economic development in some of those communities that previously had frankly been taken advantage of. But it starts with engagement early on in the process of thinking about the infrastructure development.
Another question?
Yeah, a lot of the conversation today has been about government driving renewable adaptation. And my question is, kind of curious on what the near and medium-term outlook is for renewable development within the state of Wisconsin, driven by the public sector through corporates executing renewable power purchase agreements, and how we can close our laggard position that currently exists for renewable development in Wisconsin versus our neighboring states.
I see where you're going. I don't have a lot of experience. I don't know that the corporates, right, and industrial users are. You might have a better sense. I'm certainly aware, out west of, again, the Apples and Microsofts of the world, right, kind of charting their own path with respect to both renewable energy generation and the transmission, right, and paying for all the infrastructure needed to supply them with 100%, decarbonized clean energy. I just don't have enough knowledge as to the maturity of that model in the state of Wisconsin. I suspect if it's not mature,
Many other places, it's just not
right.
down here, but
I suspect if it's not mature, it maybe eventually will be, but I don't have a lot of experience there.
because it's not just the Microsofts and the Amazons, it's all leading corporates. JCI has looked at PPAs in the past. So,
We just signed a $38 million PPA on Monday night,
congratulations.
So it's needed in Wisconsin. Frankly, I don't know why we haven't gotten that changed. I know there was a bill in the legislature this session that dealt with some of it, but I don't know the details of it, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Another question?
Yeah, hi. Sorry.
Yeah,
Were you
you
wanting
can't.
to?
Oh, great. Yeah.
So I'm Kieran Furlong with Realta Fusion. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about fusion energy, right? So I think some of this conversation, Randy, you've highlighted, transmission delays, with interconnect delays, with all of these other challenges. Some of that is how can we get out of our own way as a community? But the other part is we do need, all of the above when it comes to the solutions for zero carbon energy. So Many folks in this room might not be aware, but here in Wisconsin, we've got 3 early-stage fusion energy companies. It's a concentration that probably Seattle's the only other part of the country that comes close to it. We have programs in University of Wisconsin-Madison, in Platteville, in Milwaukee, and the University of Wisconsin system, providing the workforce, again, to another concern. So I'm just wondering, maybe this is more for Maria and Randy, has fusion energy factored into the state level conversations yet? And if not, I'm happy to contribute.
Yeah, like you said, it's an all of the above approach. I think we have talked about fusion, but I think it feels like it's so far off. And I know that there are utilities looking at fusion right now. I do believe Dairyland Power is looking at fusion. So we're kind of like watching what they're doing and kind of figuring out, okay, what does this look like into the future and how can we support it into the future. I think some of the investments that we're looking at, the governor has proposed a $5 million proposal for a small business incubator, as well as $4 million for clean energy technology development. So like getting some of those state dollars so that we can help move the technology along here in Wisconsin. But again, those proposals have to pass. And so we're also thinking on the other side of like, okay, well, if those don't pass, like what do we do to continue to help foster innovation in technology to get more of that deployment down the line. So happy to talk to you further.
You got a question?
Thank you. So I work with the Career and Solar Foundation. For the last 5 years, we've been giving grants to Wisconsin nonprofits to put solar on their organizations. And we did a survey with Renew last year, and one of the things that we asked them was, how is this impacting your community? And a lot of them replied that, they were seeing, like for example, one of them was a church, and they said that putting the solar panels on their church, all of their congregants were seeing the impact of that. So it's sort of a comment to what you're saying about how to do that. It's sort of, it's organizations that you trust. Nonprofits in any community are organizations that people trust. So focusing on getting those nonprofits in place, I think, is a good way to do that. But also, you were talking before about transmission lines and about how important it was to get the approval of the community for these larger solar things, and it's kind of been my experience and sort of feedback that I've gotten from smaller arrays when they say that it's difficult sometimes for them to get commissioned and to get online because the utility seems to drag their feet when it comes to getting them connected. So how can we work with the utilities or encourage utilities or whatever to sort of get away from this perception that they're all about commissioning big arrays that benefit them and not really working very hard to commission those smaller arrays that benefit communities and are more visible in the communities but don't necessarily contribute to a utility's bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and that's a tough one. I know there's, right, I think some folks refer to it as community-based renewable energy, community-based solar. I think a lot of folks understand and recognize the all of the above approach, right? You need utility scale, you probably need or community scale, you probably need rooftop.
Right.
To meet the challenges before us. I think always engagement with the utilities on potential solutions makes sense. I think engagement with the state and with the regulators around the options available also makes sense. What I don't have a firm grasp of are any statutory or regulatory prohibitions. Right, it probably requires some sort of analysis that way as well, but I think discussions on the utility side, discussions with the utilities about what your goals are and seeing what solutions they can offer or not, and if not, then it's a discussion with some of the community-based developers, of which I believe there are some in the state, but then also probably a discussion with the regulators and policymakers.
Yeah, this is an ongoing issue. I I understand where you're coming from, and this is something that I know third-party financing is one of those things that in our state that is a hot potato. Nobody really, does the legislature want to deal with it? Does the PSC want to deal with it? So it's something that we are dealing with. But I will say though, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund through IRA has $7 billion that are available to states, non-governmental organizations, and the focus on that funding is community solar, and energy storage. And so I think that would be a great opportunity to bring in dollars to the state and also have a partnership and forge more of a working relationship with the utilities and community solar developers, our interfaith groups that are working on this. Like having money behind some things might bring on some of that motivation. I know that's something that we're looking at. So that's another gift from IRA, but like we need to figure out how to draw that funding here in the state. So happy to talk to you more on that.
Sure. Well, because distributed energy too also reduces some of the strain on the transmission lines and gives you more time to create those, to get that agreement, buy-in to put in those additional transmission lines.
All right, our time is slowly winding down, so we're going to take 2 more questions. Saw a hand here.
Yeah, so a number of years ago, there was a trade group that dealt with energy power and controls to try to coordinate government and research institutions and businesses. That's no longer business now, but it seems like now is the critical time where we need something like that to convene all of this, because you have government funding, you've got research needs. We're talking about, wouldn't it be great if we had companies that did more of this, but I guess what are your ideas about how we can get a better working group with businesses, government, university research, workforce agencies to kind of move forward in a more coordinated fashion than what we've seen?
I'll go. You're referring to MWork, right? Midwest, what is it? Midwest Energy Research Consortium. I have been working a lot with the universities, kind of one-off different projects that they're working on, different hubs that they're thinking about standing up, different business opportunities, and I agree that some organization around that is definitely necessary, and I think that the universities are trying to stand up something new. So I have to say stay tuned on that. Also in my role, I'm happy to convene groups of people to have the initial conversation and figure out kind of what direction it needs to go, and that's my role in the state. So I see that need, but I'm also kind of watching what others are doing right now, because again, I can't do everything, but certainly willing to help convene folks and have a more organized effort around it. It's needed. I agree.
All right, our last question.
J.D. Smith, Arch Solar. We've talked a lot at a very high level about the IRA here. When that was passed as a Wisconsin-based contractor, we saw a lot of what you guys are talking about, interest across the board from businesses and nonprofits especially. But when that was passed, it felt like a huge groundswell of interest. And then, for example, Maria, I agree with you. To my knowledge, the direct pay component is enormous. That is a game changer. But to my knowledge, that still isn't finalized or accessible yet. So you had this great groundswell of interest, and then now everyone's like, hey, has that happened yet?
Yeah.
Do you guys have any input on when the actual gates will actually be opened and that money is actually available with clear and clean process?
Maria?
Yeah, so it's these are going to be tax credits, right? And so some word on the street is, hey, it's a tax credit, so just move forward at your own risk kind of thing. I know Treasury is working on, guidance and language, and we're trying to stay on top of it as much as possible. I would say the best resource that I've seen and guidance is the Dane County Office of Climate. They have a really, really great, you're nodding, so you're probably familiar with that. But I think one of the things I've said over and over is this was released in August of last year, and you're right, everyone's super excited about it, but I think we have to be patient so that we make sure we get it right and we're not jumping into projects and not being able to take advantage of the credits. So I know that like the university system, I'm working with them on like how do we figure out how you take advantage of it. Our state agencies are really interested in renewables, and we're working together. So I think as soon as we hear like where the best guidance is and how to take advantage of those direct pay, also contact your tax person, because that they should be keeping track of this as well. So that's all I can give you.
My understanding is grant dollars might start flowing soon. I think it was supposed to be by the end of first quarter, which is kind of now, or early second quarter. And then building rebate monies, I think, mid-24. And the tax credits are the tax credits.
Yeah.
That's a matter of implementation. But I think the grant dollars across all three sectors, building, transportation, and electricity, are going to start flowing soon.
Keep in touch with the state energy office as well. The grant funding will be flowing, a lot of the grant funding will be flowing through that office.
A big thank you to our panelists. Can you give them a round of applause? Thank you for all being here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to turn things back over to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Gerron. Really appreciate you taking care of this. Thank you, panelists. Very insightful. I think the answer is we're at the beginning of this conversation. Yeah, it takes a while for federal rules and money to start flowing. But the combination of these big bills is a once-in-a-generation influx of money. And I think Wisconsin can grab a lot of it, but a lot of it is competitive dollars. You mentioned the Climate Change Task Force. The leader of the Climate Change Task Force is up there, Mandela Barnes. Christina Mandela. I want to thank our sponsors, of course, Renewable Wisconsin. Thank you very much for helping with this. WAGIT, John Imes and the Wisconsin Environmental Initiative. Also, don't forget UWM Engineering behind this our partition here.
I know.
Thanks very much, and thanks to all of you, really. Really appreciate it. If you have any more ideas for conversations like this, feel free to just email me directly. You can just email info@WisPolitics.com. You can just see me afterwards. If you have a question that you didn't get to ask and you want the panelists to answer it, and you don't get to them after, you can have that question flow through me. We're going to, if you're registered for this event, we'll be putting out the video in a few days. And you can also look to WisBusiness.com. And I see Chuck Kornbach here. You can look to Chuck for stories about this event. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.